Okay. Good morning, everybody. If you're looking for miracles and parables of Jesus, this is it. We're going to be in John chapter 11 today, so if you want to go ahead and be turning there, I'm going to have most passages up here on the screen from the text itself, and then some of the other ones we'll read together from our Bibles. Stuart professionally outfitted me today with the headset, so I'm going to try not to mess with it since he's the expert. We've been, for those of us who might not have been here, we've been looking at the miracles of Jesus in the first half of this class. We're quickly approaching our transition to the parables of Jesus. And so on Wednesday, we started talking about miracles of resurrection. And we're going to continue with that study today by looking at the raising of Lazarus. So this is from John 11, verses 1 through 46. So John 11, verses 1 through 46. We've been considering a couple of different questions as we've looked at these various miracles and trying to consider them on a couple of different levels. So the first question that we're going to try to answer by the end of our time together is, why are these miracles performed in their original context and for their original audience? So what is their immediate impact what's the immediate impact Jesus is trying to accomplish with the miracle that's performed for the people who it's performed for? And then why are these miracles significant to us? And so we should be able, by the end of our study today, to answer these two questions and consider the relevance of the miracle to ourselves as well. So we're talking about the raising of Lazarus today, and this is perhaps one of the most well-known, at least to us, miracles that we're going to study, because there's a lot of detail in the story that we'll try to bring out. And it has multiple different central figures and multiple different impacts, not only on the people within the context itself, but to us as well. So three of the people that we're going to be introduced to in this story are Mary and Martha, and then, of course, Jesus. We already know a little bit about Mary and Martha from other Gospels, kind of as a preliminary introduction. So what do we already know about Mary and Martha before we get into this story of the raising of Lazarus? Yes, we know they're very good friends of Jesus, and we're going to take pains to bring that out today as well. What else do we know about Mary and Martha? Sisters, yes. So the comment was that they're sisters. Mary and Martha are sisters. Lazarus is their brother. What else do we know about these two women?
Welcomed Jesus into their home.
Yeah, in the past, they've welcomed Jesus into their home, Ethan said. So Jesus is very familiar with the hospitality of Mary and Martha. Yes, and so in John 12, and the comment was about Mary anointing Jesus with oil and wiping the oil with her hair. And so that's going to be something that we'll bring out as well here in a few minutes. What else? Jesus loved them. And so that's going to be mentioned a couple of times in the text today. The love of Jesus for Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. Mary found the tomb empty when Jesus was raised. What happens in Luke 10? Yeah, so let's go ahead and turn back there. So Luke 10, verse 38. So Luke 10, verse 38. So this is a little background information on Mary and Martha. So as Jesus and his disciples were on their way, he came to a village, that is Jesus, where a woman named Martha opened her home to him. She had a sister called Mary, who sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he said. But Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. She came to him and asked, "Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do the work by myself? Tell her to help me." "Martha, Martha," the Lord answered, "you are worried and upset about many things, but few things are needed, or indeed only one. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her." How would we describe the sisters in these few verses here in Luke? Martha's the practical one. All right, so Martha's the practical one. What about Mary? Mary had different priorities, and so it was the comment. So here we see Martha trying to get everything ready, focused on not necessarily a bad thing, being hospitable, but in this context, Jesus says, Mary has chosen the better thing, which is sitting at my feet and learning about me. Yeah, so with that in mind, I want that in the back of our mind here. We already know a little bit about the character of Mary and Martha, both their hospitality, but also maybe a little bit about how they are as people. So keep that in the back of your head as we go through this today. So I've divided this up into about 4 parts. We're only looking at one miracle today, so that will allow us to kind of dissect the text a little bit and hopefully discuss a little more what our insights are into this miracle. So the first part will be John 11, verses 1 through 16. So we learn in this portion of the text the plight of Lazarus, Martha, and Mary. And I'm not going to read the whole thing all at once, but just kind of in chunks. But let's go ahead and read verses 1 through 16 together. Starting in verse 1. Now a man named Lazarus was sick. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. This Mary, whose brother Lazarus now lay sick, was the same one who poured perfume on the Lord and wiped his feet with her hair. So the sisters sent word to Jesus, "Lord, the one you love is sick." When he heard this, Jesus said, "This sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it." Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days. And then he said to his disciples, "Let us go back to Judea." "But Rabbi," they said, "a short while ago the Jews there tried to stone you, and yet you're going back?" Jesus answered, "Are there not 12 hours of daylight? Anyone who walks in the daytime will not stumble, for they see by this world's light. It is when a person walks at night that they stumble, for they have no light." After he had said this, he went on to tell them, "Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I am going there to wake him up." His disciples replied, "Lord, if he sleeps, he'll get better." Jesus had been speaking of his death, but his disciples thought he meant natural sleep. So then he told them plainly, "Lazarus is dead, and for your sake I'm glad I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him." Then Thomas, also known as Didymus, said to the rest of the disciples, "Let us also go, that we may die with him." As we read through that, there are a few things that might have stood out to us. What stood out to you?
At least the second time that Jesus refers to death as sleeping.
Yeah, so the comment was, this is about the second time, at least the second time, that Jesus has referred to death as sleeping.
I think the purpose of it is very significant. It's not unto death.
Right, so the comment was, the purpose of this is very significant. It's not unto death. Yeah, he waited, right? So, and we're gonna bring that out a little bit. So he gets word about, and I'm jumping ahead of myself here, but he gets word, and his immediate reaction is, all right, let's wait for a little bit.
Immediately, it seems that Jesus' focus is on the good outcome of the disciples. When he says, "I'm glad I wasn't there for your all's benefit." Because I'm guessing if he was there, it'd be harder to sit and wait for 2 days, but it seems to be working according to plan.
Yeah, so Ethan says Jesus' focus seems to be, as we've brought out a couple of times when these miracles are performed, his focus seems to be on, at least initially, the good that this will do the disciples. So he says, "For your sake, I'm glad I was not there so that you may believe." Anything else stand out to us right off the bat?
Lord doesn't always do things that please us, make us happy. He does things for our spiritual good. And I believe that's a lesson here.
So the Lord doesn't always, the comment was, the Lord doesn't always do things to please us, but for our spiritual benefit. So, as we said, Lazarus is one of a trio of siblings that Jesus is close friends with. He falls ill in Bethany, which we've mentioned this city a couple of times. And then without making a specific request, at least in the text, Mary and Martha send word to Jesus of Lazarus' illness. And this was brought out in one of the initial comments, but it's really obvious that Jesus is close friends with Lazarus and Mary and Martha. But this did not shield them from this incident, from physical illness, from grief, from death even though they were close friends of Jesus. And so, regardless of that, Mary and Martha call on Jesus to come to Bethany, be with the three of us so we can be together because we love each other. So these are real friendships. So it's easy for us, well, let me personalize this. It's easy for me, as I've kind of gone through as a Bible student, to almost make Jesus a two-dimensional figure, right? He has real friendships, and we'll see in this text real emotions that are very relatable, right? And so there's a grander message here, I think. But there's also the message that Jesus had these personal relationships just like we have. He has friends that he cares about and that he loves. He's going to experience the emotions that come with losing people that are close to you or seeing them suffer. And so we're going to try to make a point about that a little later on, but I think that stood out to me as I was reading through this time, maybe more so than it had before, and I don't know why that is, but just the relatability of this situation. If we've ever experienced the loss of someone close to us or been with someone who has lost someone close to them. So as we're introduced to the relationship among these four, is there anything that we find significant about this relationship among Jesus and Lazarus and his sisters? They really believed in Jesus.
All three of them did. But that's not the end of the relationship. He always wants our faith in him to increase.
And so the comment was that they really believed in Jesus, but that's not the end. He wants our faith to increase. So, as was brought out before, Jesus' response here might seem a little odd, or if we had no context for who Jesus is and his mission, it might seem even kind of cruel. So his response was, your friend is sick, the one who you love is sick. Okay, let's wait for a couple of days and then we'll go down there. All right, so that seems a little odd to us. But Jesus knows the outcome of this situation. He says, this will not end in death. And I think this has been brought out a couple of times, that there's a greater purpose that's meant to be fulfilled with this incident. And John even makes sure to emphasize Jesus' love for Mary and Martha and Lazarus. So he says, now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So it's almost, to me, like John is saying, Jesus has a real love for these three siblings and wants to emphasize that to us as we're reading. He also is facing a personal risk to himself. So as the disciples bring out, when Jesus says, hey, let's go ahead and go back to Judea, the disciples are quick to point out, do you remember that the Jews just tried to stone you in Judea? Do you remember that when that happened? And you want to go back there? Why do you think they may have been brought this up to Jesus? Maybe based on what they had witnessed before with him. What might he have been able to do instead of going to Bethany? Yeah, so the comment was, you could have just spoken and it would have happened. So I think we've brought that out in our classes, that Jesus doesn't even have to be there, right? So to me, it reads that his disciples are saying, are you sure this is the way you want to go? There's other options here, right, that could accomplish the same thing if you're wanting to ease the situation. And yet he goes to Bethany at personal risk, knowing the finality of Lazarus' illness. He's dead. He knows Lazarus is dead already. When we get into the second part of the text, Lazarus has been dead 4 days. And he knows the ultimate outcome, but he still goes to Bethany anyway. One reason is that, as has been brought out, this is a powerful sign that's going to be performed using the death of Lazarus. So Jesus says, Lazarus is dead to his disciples so that you may believe. So as Ethan brought out, his disciples are on his mind here, and we'll see this impacts multiple others as well. Let me catch up here. What will this miracle's purpose be as a sign to the people of that day and time, do you think? So as a sign, and these miracles are called signs, what is the purpose of this sign to the people of that day and age? Yes, sir.
The biggest problem Jesus had when he started his ministry is people believing he said, I am the Son of God. Oh no, you're the son of Joseph. It's hard. We know who you are. I'm the Son of God. The things that he's going to be doing to prove that he's the Son of God, Joseph's son couldn't do. And so he's going to, his ministry is going to be short lived. He's got to get on with the work that his father sent him to do. And that means showing and saying, you've got to believe that he truly is the Son of God. And in him is the eternal life. The Father has given you his work to do. This is really the criminal of the whole thing. Only God can do this. I say I'm the Son of God. What I see my Father do, he's taught me I can do everything. The Father has given me the eternal life. He and that's the point. He's going to be riding that home. And then he's ultimately going to be the sacrifice. The perfect sacrifice. So that we can have eternal life through him.
So the comment was, ultimately, this miracle, the purpose of this miracle is to drive home the nature of Christ. So he's the Son of God, and pointing to his resurrection, to his to the eternal life that God provides to those who believe. So the scope of his power, so the comment was, this miracle will demonstrate kind of the breadth of the power of Christ that extends to Hades itself. One thing I wanted to bring out is Thomas's comment here. So in verse 16, Thomas says, let us also go that we may die with him. So anytime the disciples have one of these asides, I feel like we kind of are like, oh, okay, come on guys, let's get with the program here. But what stands out to me is the dedication that Thomas has in the face of this kind of presumed danger that they had just expressed. And he says, all right, let's go. All right, Jesus' purpose to go to Bethany, he's going to face maybe another attempt at his life. All right, let's go. And so I think here, as I was meditating on this a little bit, I see the roots of their future missionary work and martyrdom in statements like these. They hadn't reached that point yet. They still had some refining that they had to go through. But the roots of it are there, right? This passion for and dedication to Christ. One interesting note about Thomas, tradition holds, kind of extra biblical tradition, that Thomas's missionary work took him all the way to India, and he took the gospel to India. Again, that's kind of extra biblical tradition, but I think that is his dedication is belied by this statement he makes here. So the comment was that in delaying, Jesus brings suffering or pain to these people that we've already emphasized he has intense love for. And that might translate to us as well. Do we avoid bringing momentary pain to people that we love and neglect saying something that's necessary for their betterment, spiritual betterment? And ultimately, that's what Jesus is doing here, bringing temporary suffering for ultimately bringing a spiritual betterment. So let's go to 17 and look at 17 through 32. So Jesus goes to Mary and Martha. On his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Now Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, and many Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them in the loss of their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, but Mary stayed at home. Lord, Martha said to Jesus, if you had been here, my brother would not have died, but I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Martha answered, I know he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live, even though they die. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this? Yes, Lord, she replied, I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who is to come into the world. After she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary aside. The teacher is here, she said, and is asking for you. When Mary heard this, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet entered the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who had been with Mary in the house comforting her noticed how quickly she got up and went out, they followed her, supposing she was going to the tomb to mourn there. When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. What stands out to us about that part of the text?
Said the same thing to Jesus. When he had been there. I think it just shows him when he was involved.
So the comment was, and we'll bring this out in a minute, both Mary and Martha say the same thing, right? If you had been here, my brother wouldn't have died. Maybe demonstrating a faith, but not a full understanding of who Jesus was and what he could do.
Limitation on the ability of the Son of God to do what he's supposed to do. He can raise the dead before we know it.
Yeah, so putting limitations, the comment was, on Mary and Martha were knowingly or unknowingly on what Jesus could do, the Son of God and the fullness of his power to raise the dead. One thing that stood out to me as I was reading through this is thinking about women in the story of God's people. Women in the story of God's people are often play a prominent role. So as heroines, as sources of inspiration, as well as disciples of Christ, which is upside down really from the culture, especially the larger Roman culture that they lived in at the time, where women's roles were really defined by their station and their relationship with their husband, right? So there were instances of women being independently wealthy and owning property and things like that, but those were really the exception in specific contexts in this larger Roman world. And really, the more common story in Rome was that of a kind of second-class citizen, almost, but not so in God's kingdom. And so Lazarus is raised, and that is kind of what we title this miracle, but really the story seems to be about the sisters, right? And their faith and the development of their faith. And so Martha's reaction to Jesus as he is approaching is to run out to him and to proclaim her enduring faith in him. Does this seem to be a inversion of Martha's story a little bit? What had she done initially in Luke? What had she been concerned with? Yeah, physical things. So getting the house ready, making sure everybody had what they needed. But here she's running out to see Jesus and proclaiming her faith.
And she's right. She's right. There will be a resurrection. She believes in that. But to know that Jesus is the resurrection, Jesus can raise Lazarus back, that she hasn't, that really hasn't dawned on her faith at all.
So she has a faith in Jesus, but she doesn't know the extent to which he is able to fulfill with his power what she hopes he can. Right? So Martha's proclaiming her faith here. Even now she says, God will give you whatever you ask. But she kind of leaves the details to him. So she proclaims this kind of simple faith in Jesus. God will give you whatever you ask. And I'll kind of leave the details up to you. I ran across this quote that I thought was pretty good. So Charles Spurgeon was a 19th century British preacher. And he says, some prayers would be all the better if they were shorter. All the better if they did not so much declare our own will as declare our confidence in the goodwill of Christ. So what I find interesting again about this is we have Mary's declaration of faith, this kind of simple declaration, and then Jesus proceeds to engage her in this theological discussion about the resurrection. Right? He says, I am the resurrection and the life. Martha says, I know there will be a resurrection on the last day. Jesus says, I'm the resurrection. Martha probably doesn't understand this completely, I'm sure, but she still professes her trust in Jesus as the Messiah and a trust in his capability and power as such. What's notable about that? For us, maybe.
She knows the resurrection is going to be by God's power. She fully reveals that. You can ask. I don't know about you, Jesus. You can ask the Father, and he'll do it. But for her to have faith that Jesus can do that,
Yeah, so this interplay here, Jesus as the resurrection, Martha putting faith in Jesus that whatever he asks, God will grant him, even if she doesn't quite understand what all that means. Yeah, the comment was her faith can only go so far as her knowledge. Right? And so Jesus, she's going to learn a few things, right? Yeah.
I think there's one kind of faith that we have when we're told something, and there's yet a step further when we decide for ourselves. It looks like Jesus is trying to get her to decide for herself, and she almost gets there, I think, when she says, I know whatever you ask, it can happen. And you could say from Zion, I know whatever you ask, and I think she's almost there. It's kind of where Abraham was, because no one told Abraham God was going to raise his son. He decided that for himself, we read about that in Hebrews. But he decided
Yeah, so the comment was that we can see Jesus here trying to get Martha to come to this conclusion about himself, comparing that to Abraham, not knowing that if God would bring Isaac back to life or not, but having that faith and God trying to get him there to see that. Anything else? So Martha tells her sister, Jesus is asking for you. And then Mary herself goes out. And she also says, as we brought out earlier, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. And so I kind of think, and I ran across this as well. This must have been a topic of discussion, don't you think? For Martha and Mary to say the exact same thing. Has this been brought up before as they're waiting on Jesus to get there? If he gets here, Lazarus has a chance. And if he gets here. So maybe it's a coincidence, but that might stretch it a little bit. Do we read this differently as Mary saying this differently than Martha? So if you had been here, my brother would not have died.
Could be read as an accusation. Why weren't
So, yeah, so the comment was we could read this in an accusatory tone. Of course, we can't know because we're not given that information, but it certainly seems different to me.
think about that? If they sent word to Jesus, they may have known where he was, so they wouldn't know the distance. The expectation would have been for his arrival to have come soon.
Yeah, so if they sent for Jesus, it follows that they knew where he was. So maybe their expectation was, oh, he's going to get here in however much time, enough time to do something about the situation. And then, as was brought out earlier, I think it's good to keep in mind that this Mary is the same Mary of chapter 12, who is anointing Jesus and wiping his feet with her hair. And so she herself undergoes this same process as well, as we see kind of Jesus bringing Martha along. He does the same thing for Mary, right? So let's read about Lazarus being raised. So starting in verse 33. When Jesus saw her weeping, that is Mary, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. Where have you laid him? He asked. Come and see, Lord, they replied. Jesus wept. Then the Jews said, see how he loved him. But some of them said, could not he have opened the eyes of the blind have kept this man from dying? Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. Take away the stone, he said. But Lord, said Martha, the sister of the dead man, by this time there's a bad odor, for he has been in there for 4 days. Then Jesus said, did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God? So they took away the stone. Then Jesus looked up and said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me. Then he said this. When he said this, Jesus called in a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. The dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with the strips of linen and a cloth around his face. Jesus said to them, take off the grave clothes and let him go. After Jesus' encounter with Mary, there's sort of a shift, it seems to me, in Jesus' emotional state in the text. So here we have Mary weeping, we have the mourners weeping, and has been brought out. These are not just sort of, maybe not completely all just friends and relatives, but maybe professional mourners whose job it was to mourn the dead. And the text says Jesus is deeply moved in spirit and troubled. This phrase, deeply moved, can be translated indignant or angry. So Jesus here is overcome with emotion. There are a couple of different possibilities of why Jesus might be feeling anger here, and this is not original with me, of course. The first one is that Jesus' anger is a response to kind of the curse of death and its personal impact that is being felt here. Another possibility I came across is that Jesus' anger is in response to a lack of faith present in the mourners and Mary. And of course, Jesus is facing death pretty soon and knows that what it will take to conquer death ultimately. Just personally, I kind of go with the first one. Jesus' anger is a response to the havoc that this curse has wrought on mankind, but also at this personal level on his friends. But I'm not going to argue with you if you hold the other view either. What do we think about that? Why would Jesus be feeling anger here? It says it a couple times in the text. Oh, too late. Jesus weeps for Martha, Mary, and Lazarus, plainly experiencing grief and empathy. Another Spurgeon quote, sometimes we're told that if we really believed that our friends would rise again and they are safe and happy even now, we would not weep. Why not? Jesus did. There cannot be any error in following where Jesus leads the way. And then just a couple of applications here. So I think the key to this whole miracle is what Jesus says in verses 25 and 26. I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live even though they die, and whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this? And so the raising of Lazarus points to Jesus as the resurrection and the life, and apart from him, we have neither. And then the miracle is a type and shadow of Jesus' own resurrection. Any final thoughts there? Right. No comment from Lazarus recorded. That's true. All right. You may pass.